Midnight, 30 years ago. Rain poured from the dark sky, soaking the empty streets of a small country town. Thunder echoed across the hills. The old church stood alone, its stained glass windows glowing softly from the candlelight inside. A tiny basket rested on the front steps. Inside lay a newborn baby wrapped in a faded pink blanket. Her little hands trembled. Her cries grew louder with every passing second. Far away, the sound of hurried footsteps faded into the darkness. Whoever had left her there never looked back. Inside the church, Father Michael paused in the middle of prayer. He slowly raised his head. "Did you hear that?" Another cry echoed through the sanctuary. He hurried toward the entrance. As soon as he opened the heavy wooden doors, the cold wind rushed inside. His eyes fell upon the basket. "Oh, dear Lord." He knelt beside it. The baby reached toward him with tiny fingers. Tears filled his eyes. Who could leave such a beautiful child? Just then, headlights appeared through the rain. A car stopped beside the church. A husband and wife stepped out carrying umbrellas. They had come to pray after receiving heartbreaking news earlier that evening. The doctor's words still echoed in their hearts. "You will never be able to have children." The woman looked exhausted. She had cried all afternoon. Her name was Helen Carter. Beside her stood her husband, Richard Carter. As they approached the church doors, they heard the baby's cries. "What is that?" Father Michael gently lifted the infant into his arms. "I just found her," Helen gasped. "Oh my goodness." She stepped closer. The little girl opened her eyes. Without warning, she reached out and wrapped her tiny fingers around Helen's hand. Everything became silent. Even the rain seemed to fade. Helen burst into tears. Richard watched quietly. She looked at him. Richard. He already knew what she was thinking. "No." She smiled through her tears. "I think God brought her here." Father Michael looked at both of them. "I believe he did." Richard slowly touched the baby's tiny hand. She squeezed his finger. He laughed softly for the first time in months. "She's beautiful," Helen whispered. "Can we take care of her?" Father Michael smiled. "If no family comes forward after the legal process, perhaps God has already chosen her parents." Helen held the baby close. The little girl immediately stopped crying. She closed her eyes and peacefully fell asleep. Helen kissed her forehead. "I promise, you will never be alone again." The church bell rang. 6 months later. The courtroom was quiet. Legal papers rested on the judge's desk. The judge smiled warmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, you have completed every requirement." He signed the final document. "From this day forward, this child is legally your daughter." Helen cried. Richard smiled proudly. The judge looked toward the sleeping baby. "What will her name be?" Helen looked lovingly into the baby's eyes. "Grace," the judge smiled. "An appropriate name," Richard nodded. "Because she is God's grace to us." The judge handed them the adoption certificate. Father Michael stood nearby. He placed a hand on their shoulders. "Raise her to know God." "We will. You must love her as if she were born from your own hearts." Helen answered without hesitation. "We already do." They walked out of the courthouse smiling. The future looked beautiful. None of them knew how much would change. 5 years later. The delivery room echoed with joyful cries. A nurse smiled. "It's a girl." Richard laughed with excitement. Helen held the newborn close. "Our daughter." Outside the room, 5-year-old Grace waited with Father Michael. She clutched a handmade drawing. On it was a picture of 4 smiling people holding hands. She looked up. "When can I see Mommy?" "Very soon." The nurse opened the door. "You may come in." Grace ran inside. Her face glowed with excitement. Mommy! She climbed onto the bed. I made this for you. Helen smiled, but her attention remained on the baby. Thank you, sweetheart. Grace looked at the tiny infant. She's so little. Richard laughed. You're a big sister now. She gently touched the baby's hand. I'll always protect her. Helen smiled. We're naming her Emily. Grace kissed the baby's forehead. Hi, Emily. The baby wrapped a finger around hers. Grace giggled. I think she likes me. Everyone laughed. For a brief moment, they truly were a happy family. The years passed. Emily learned to walk. Grace helped her. She fed her. She sang lullabies every night. Then another baby arrived. A little boy, Jacob. Grace loved him just as much. She changed diapers, rocked him to sleep, read him Bible stories. When he cried, she was always the first one there. But little by little, things began to change. Helen no longer asked Grace to play. Instead, Grace, can you wash the dishes? She nodded. Yes, Mom. Another day, Grace, watch your brother while I take your sister shopping. Okay. Another day, Grace, clean your room. Then your sisters. Then your brothers. As Emily and Jacob grew older, their chores became Grace's responsibilities. Birthday presents became smaller. Birthday hugs became shorter. Conversations became colder. She didn't understand why. She only tried harder. On Grace's 10th birthday, the kitchen was decorated with colorful balloons. Grace smiled brightly. Today's my birthday. She carefully set the table herself. She had baked her own birthday cake with Father Michael's help. The front door opened. Richard walked inside carrying shopping bags. Emily squealed with excitement. Daddy bought me a doll, Jacob laughed. I got a toy truck. Grace looked around. Maybe mine is still in the car. Richard sat down. Helen began serving dinner. Everyone ate. No one mentioned her birthday. She quietly smiled anyway. Maybe they're waiting until after dinner. Dinner ended. Emily ran outside. Jacob followed. Richard turned on the television. Helen washed dishes. Grace stood alone in the dining room. The candles on her little cake slowly melted. She stared at them, then quietly lit them herself. Father Michael suddenly knocked on the door. I hope I'm not late, she smiled. You remembered. He looked around the silent room. Did they celebrate already? She hesitated. No. He understood immediately. Without saying another word, he sat beside her. Then let's celebrate together. He began singing. Happy birthday to you. She joined him halfway through the song, trying not to cry. When the song ended, he smiled. Make a wish. She closed her eyes. Dear God, I don't want presents. I just want my family to love me. She blew out the candles. Outside, Helen watched through the window. She looked away. Before the sun rose, the alarm clock read 4:30 a.m. Grace quietly climbed out of bed. The rest of the house slept peacefully. She swept the floors, prepared breakfast, ironed school uniforms, packed lunches, fed the chickens, hung laundry outside. By 6 o'clock, everything was finished. Helen entered the kitchen. Without saying good morning. Why are the biscuits smaller today? I ran out of flour. Then you should have planned better. I'm sorry. Emily entered wearing a brand new jacket. Mom? Where are my shoes? They're by the door. Grace quickly walked over. I polished them last night. Emily barely looked at her. You missed a spot. She inspected the shoe. I'm sorry, I'll fix it. Jacob came downstairs yawning. Where's my breakfast? She placed the plate in front of him. He took one bite. It's cold. I'll warm it. No, forget it. He shoved the plate away. Food scattered across the floor. Grace immediately knelt to clean it. I'm sorry. Richard looked up from the newspaper. You should have served it hot. She quietly nodded. Yes, sir. Not one person thanked her. The church had become her refuge. Whenever life became too heavy, she walked there. Father Michael was trimming flowers outside. He smiled. I was wondering when you'd come. She laughed softly. How did you know? I know that face. They sat beneath an old oak tree. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, he asked, What's hurting your heart today? She stared at the ground. Father, do you think God loves everyone the same? He looked surprised. Why would you ask that? She hesitated. Sometimes, I wonder if I did something wrong. What makes you think that? She fought back tears. No matter how hard I try, I'm never enough. He gently placed a hand over hers. My child, you are not loved because of what you do. You are loved because God made you. She finally looked at him. Then why doesn't my family love me? He smiled sadly. Sometimes, people forget how to love. But God never does. She wiped her tears. I don't want to hate them. Then don't. Pray for them. Even when it hurts. She nodded. I will. That evening, Grace knelt beside her bed. The moonlight shone through her small bedroom window. She folded her hands. Dear Lord, please bless Mom. Bless Dad. Bless Emily. Bless Jacob. They don't understand how much I love them. Please don't let my heart become bitter. Teach me to love them the way you love me. Outside her bedroom door, Helen stood silently. She had come to tell Grace to turn off the light. Instead, she heard every word. A tear rolled down her cheek. She almost opened the door. Almost apologized. Instead, she quietly walked away. Time passed. Grace had finished high school with honors. She immediately found work at a local grocery store. That afternoon, she walked through the front door smiling. She held her very first paycheck. I got paid today. Richard looked up. How much? She handed him the envelope. I wanted to help with the bills. He counted the money, then slipped every dollar into his wallet. We'll keep this, she smiled. Okay. Emily laughed from the couch. So now you're paying rent? Jacob smirked. About time. Grace forced another smile. I don't mind helping. She quietly walked to her room. Closed the door. Sat on her bed. Tears finally came. She whispered to herself. It's okay. God sees. Grace walked alone toward the bus stop. She carried an old backpack and a lunchbox she had packed herself. The rising sun painted the sky with shades of gold. Birds sang from the trees. She stopped for a moment, closed her eyes, took a deep breath. Lord, I don't know what you have planned for my life, but wherever you lead me, I'll follow. A gentle breeze brushed across her face. She smiled. For the first time in many years, it felt as though heaven itself was whispering, Your story is only beginning. She stepped onto the waiting bus. Another day, another burden. The time was 4:30 a.m. The alarm clock buzzed softly. Grace reached over and turned it off before it could wake anyone else. She sat on the edge of her bed for a moment. Her body ached from yesterday's work. She rubbed her sore hands. Small cuts covered her fingers from stocking heavy boxes at the grocery store. She smiled anyway. Thank you, Lord, for another day. She quietly stood. Within minutes she had swept the house, prepared breakfast, packed lunches, folded the laundry, and watered the flowers outside. The aroma of fresh bread filled the kitchen. The front door opened. Richard walked in after taking the trash outside. He glanced at the table. Coffee. She immediately poured him a cup. Here you go. He took a sip. It's cold. I'm sorry, I'll make another pot. No. Just do better tomorrow. She nodded. I will. Emily came downstairs while scrolling through her phone. Mom, I need new shoes. Helen looked at Grace. Since you're working now, you can help pay for them. Grace smiled. Of course. Emily looked surprised. You don't even know how much they cost. If they help you, I'll do my best. Jacob laughed. She's too nice. Nobody noticed the tiredness behind her smile. The next morning, customers filled the aisles. Grace stacked boxes of canned food onto the shelves. Her manager, Mrs. Collins, watched from across the store. A young employee sighed loudly. I'm tired, another answered. I wish I could go home. Mrs. Collins smiled as she watched Grace. Notice something? They looked toward her. She's been here since 6 this morning. Has she taken a break? No. Has she complained? No. That's why she's different. A customer accidentally dropped several glass jars. They shattered across the floor. The woman covered her face. I'm so sorry. Grace hurried over. It's okay. She knelt and began cleaning. The woman reached for her purse. I'll pay for everything. She smiled warmly. Accidents happen. You don't seem upset. She laughed softly. If I became angry every time life surprised me, I'd never smile. The woman stared at her. Your parents must be proud. For just a second, Grace's smile faded. I hope so. That evening, Hillside Diner. The dinner rush had begun. Grace changed into her waitress uniform. Another waitress, Lily, smiled. I don't know how you do this, she laughed. Do what? You work all day, then come here all night. She shrugged. God gives me strength. Lily smiled. I wish I had your faith. A fede a dueting. The diner buzzed with conversation. Families laughed together. Friends celebrated birthdays. In the far corner, a man sat alone. His clothes were covered in sawdust. His hands were rough from years of hard work. His name was Daniel Brooks. He quietly read his Bible while waiting for dinner. Grace approached the table. Good evening. What can I get for you? He looked up. Their eyes met for the first time. His gentle smile immediately stood out. I'll have today's special. And coffee, please. Coming right up. She walked away. Daniel watched her greet every customer with the same kindness. Even the rude ones. A little boy accidentally knocked over his glass of juice. It spilled all over the floor. His mother looked embarrassed. I'm so sorry. Grace grabbed a towel. It's all right. She knelt beside the little boy. Looks like the floor was thirsty. The boy laughed. So was I. She smiled. I'll bring you another drink. Daniel watched silently. He whispered to himself. Lord. There's something special about her. The restaurant slowly emptied. Grace wiped the last table. Daniel walked toward the register. How much do I owe? She smiled. $18.75. He handed her $20. Keep the change. You don't have to. I know, he smiled. I want to. She thanked him. As he turned to leave, he stopped. Looked back. Reached into his pocket. Pulled out a clean napkin. Borrowed a pen. He quietly wrote something. Then folded it. Before leaving, he handed it to her. I think this belongs to you. She looked confused. What is it? You'll see after work. He smiled and walked out. She watched him leave. Lily hurried over. What was that about? I don't know. You aren't going to open it? She laughed. Not yet. Hours later, after everyone had gone home, she unfolded the napkin. Written neatly were the words, I don't know your story, but I noticed your kindness. The world needs more people like you. If you'd ever like to have coffee, my name is Daniel. Here's my number. She read it again, then again. For the first time in years, a genuine smile spread across her face. She folded the napkin carefully, placed it inside her Bible. 3 days passed. Grace couldn't stop thinking about the note. Finally, during her lunch break, she stood outside the grocery store holding her phone. She whispered, Lord, if this isn't your will, please close the door. After a deep breath, she dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice. Then, hello? His voice was calm. She smiled nervously. Hi, this is Grace. A brief silence followed. Then he laughed. I was beginning to think you threw my note away. I almost did. What changed your mind? She looked toward the sky. I prayed first. I'm glad you did. He smiled through the phone. So, would you still like that coffee? She hesitated. I've actually never gone out with anyone before. Neither have I. You haven't? He chuckled. No. I've been too busy working, she laughed softly. So have I. Then maybe we've both earned 1 cup of coffee, she smiled. I think we have. Inside small coffee shop, Saturday afternoon. The little cafe overlooked a peaceful lake. Daniel stood as she approached. He pulled out her chair. Thank you. You're welcome. They ordered coffee. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, he smiled. So, what do you like to do when you're not working? She laughed. I work. What about weekends? I work. He smiled. You really don't stop. She shook her head. I've never really had time. He looked at her with gentle curiosity. What keeps you going? She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. My faith. When life gets hard, I remind myself, God has never left me. He nodded. I've learned the same thing. She looked at him. What do you do? I'm a carpenter. My father taught me. I dream of starting my own construction company one day. Her eyes brightened. Really? He nodded. I don't want to become rich. I just want to build homes that families can afford. She smiled warmly. That's a beautiful dream. What about yours? She thought quietly. I've never dreamed about money. I just want a home filled with love. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. There was sadness in her eyes, but there was also hope. He silently prayed, Lord, if it is your will, help me protect her heart. The afternoon sun reflected across the peaceful lake. 2 strangers, unaware that God was already writing the next chapter of their story. That next Saturday morning, the morning sun reflected across the calm lake. Birds sang from the tall oak trees surrounding the little coffee shop. Daniel arrived a few minutes early. He wore a clean blue button-down shirt, jeans, and the same worn leather boots Grace had noticed the first night they met. He checked his watch, then smiled to himself. I hope she comes. A few moments later, he looked toward the sidewalk. Grace was walking slowly, carrying an old canvas handbag. She wore a simple light blue dress and white cardigan. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy. Yet there was a quiet beauty about her that came from the peace she carried inside. As she noticed him waiting, she smiled. I'm sorry if I kept you waiting. He stood and pulled out her chair. You didn't. I was just early. She laughed softly. I've never met anyone who enjoys waiting. He smiled. Maybe I was looking forward to today. A waitress approached their table. What can I get for you two? Grace looked at Daniel. What are you having? Coffee. She laughed. Just coffee? He shrugged. I don't want to spend too much, she smiled. I understand. Turning to the waitress, she said, I'll have coffee too. The waitress nodded and walked away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Grace looked out across the lake. It's beautiful here. It is. I come here sometimes after work. To think? He nodded. To pray. She looked back at him, surprised. You pray here? Sometimes. When life gets noisy, this place reminds me to listen. She smiled. I like that. The waitress returned with their coffee. Daniel wrapped both hands around his mug. So, I've been wondering something. She tilted her head. What is it? The first night we met, you smiled at everyone. Even the people who weren't kind. She looked down into her coffee. I try. Why? She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she answered honestly. When I was little, Father Michael told me something. What did he say? He said, you never know which person is carrying the heaviest burden. So if someone speaks with anger, I try to answer with kindness. He nodded slowly. That's not easy. No, it isn't. A little girl nearby accidentally dropped her ice cream. She immediately burst into tears. Without hesitation, Grace stood. I'll be right back. She walked over, knelt beside the little girl. Oh no. It looks like your ice cream wanted to hug the ground. The little girl giggled through her tears. It did. Grace smiled. Would you like another one? The little girl looked toward her mother. The woman shook her head. We can't afford another one today. Grace quietly reached into her purse. She walked to the counter, purchased another ice cream, then handed it to the little girl. There you go. The child hugged her tightly. Thank you. You're welcome. As Grace returned to the table, Daniel watched in silence. She sat down. You didn't have to do that. She smiled. I know. But I wanted to. He looked at her for a long moment. Has anyone ever told you that you have a beautiful heart? She felt her cheeks grow warm. No, not really. They should. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed. Thank you. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. They talked about childhood memories, favorite Bible stories, their dreams, their fears. For the first time in years, Grace laughed freely. It wasn't forced. It wasn't hiding pain. It was real. As they walked toward their cars, Daniel stopped. I have a question. She looked at him. Would you like to go to church with me tomorrow? She smiled almost immediately. I'd love to. Really? She nodded. I've never missed church. He laughed. Then I'll pick you up at 9. I'll be ready. She waved goodbye. As she drove away on the town bus, Daniel whispered to himself, Thank you, Lord. I don't know where this is going, but thank you. Sunday morning. Church bells rang across the town. Families greeted one another with warm smiles. Children laughed as they ran across the grass. Daniel parked his old pickup truck near the front entrance. He stepped out and straightened his tie. A few seconds later, the town bus stopped nearby. Grace stepped off carrying her Bible. When she saw him waiting, her smile appeared instantly. Good morning. Good morning. You look nice. She laughed softly. So do you. They walked toward the church together. As they reached the entrance, Father Michael noticed them. His face lit up. There you are. Grace smiled. Good morning, Father. He looked toward Daniel. And who is this young man? She glanced at him. This is Daniel. He works in construction. Daniel extended his hand. It's an honor to meet you. Father Michael smiled warmly. The honor is mine. Looking back at Grace, he whispered playfully, So, is he the reason you've been smiling more lately? She blushed. Oh, Father, Daniel laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. The three of them walked inside together. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows. The choir began singing, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Grace quietly closed her eyes. She sang every word from memory. Daniel glanced toward her. There was peace on her face, unlike anything he had ever seen. During the sermon, the pastor opened his Bible. Our scripture today comes from Matthew chapter 5. He read, Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Grace listened carefully. Every word seemed to settle deep within her heart. The pastor continued, Forgiveness is not weakness. It is one of the greatest acts of strength. Daniel noticed tears forming in her eyes. He wondered why. After the service, church members gathered outside. An elderly widow struggled to carry several heavy grocery bags. Grace hurried over. Let me help you. Oh dear. You've already done enough. She smiled. I don't mind. Daniel picked up the remaining bags. I'll help too. The woman smiled. God bless both of you. As they walked toward the widow's house, Daniel finally asked, Can I ask you something? She looked at him. Of course. Why do you always help everyone? She thought quietly before answering. When I was a little girl, I used to pray every birthday that my family would love me. He looked surprised. They didn't? She smiled sadly. They loved each other. I just always felt different. He didn't interrupt. She continued walking. I kept wondering if maybe I wasn't good enough. His heart ached hearing those words. So I decided something. What? If I couldn't make people love me, I could still choose to love them. Daniel stopped walking. She turned back. Is everything all right? He nodded slowly. I've met a lot of people. But I've never met someone who chooses kindness after being hurt. She smiled gently. I'm still learning. No. He shook his head. I think you're teaching the rest of us. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of birds and the gentle breeze filled the silence. As they reached the widow's porch, she accepted the groceries with grateful tears. I don't have much to give. But may God bless your future together. Grace laughed nervously. Oh. We're just friends. The widow smiled knowingly. Sometimes God introduces friends before he writes a love story. Daniel looked at Grace. She looked away, smiling. Neither of them said another word, but somewhere deep inside, a tiny seed of hope had been planted. Church, where years ago a baby had been left on its steps. The same church that had once given Grace a family was now quietly preparing to give her something she had never expected. A future. After the Sunday service that afternoon, the church parking lot slowly emptied. Families hugged goodbye, children ran across the grass, older couples walked hand in hand toward their cars. Grace stood near the church steps holding her Bible close to her chest. Daniel walked beside her. The afternoon sunlight rested gently across the old church building. I always feel peaceful here. Daniel looked at her. Because this is where you found God? She smiled softly. Not exactly. He looked curious. What do you mean? She touched the old wooden church doors. This is where God found me. Daniel looked at her. She continued. When I was younger, whenever I felt alone, I came here. Father Michael always reminded me that God sees what people don't see. Daniel nodded. He sounds like a good man. He is. He was there for me when I felt like nobody else was. A quiet moment passed between them. Daniel noticed something in her voice. Not anger, not bitterness, just a sadness she had carried for a long time. Grace. She looked at him. Yes. Do you ever let yourself be taken care of? The question surprised her. She laughed lightly. Why would you ask that? Because you spend your whole life taking care of everyone else. She looked away. I guess I'm used to it. Used to what? She took a breath. Being the person people need, but not the person they choose. Daniel felt the weight behind those words. He wanted to ask more, but he knew some wounds needed time. Instead, he said, everyone deserves someone who chooses them. She looked at him. For a moment, she wondered what it would feel like to truly be chosen. That evening, as Grace was thinking about that thought, Daniel's old pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Grace looked surprised. What are you doing here? He smiled. I wanted to make sure you got home safely. She laughed. I've been taking the bus for years. I know. But that doesn't mean someone can't walk beside you. She smiled. Thank you. They stepped out of the truck. Before Grace could open the front door, the sound of voices came from inside. Helen's voice. Grace. The door opened. Helen looked at Daniel, then back at Grace. Where have you been? Grace looked confused. I went to church. You were gone all day. I was with Daniel after service. Helen's expression changed. Daniel? Grace nodded. He's a friend. Emily appeared behind her mother. She looked Daniel up and down. So this is the person you've been spending time with? Grace became uncomfortable. Emily. What? I'm just surprised. You actually have time for friends now. Daniel noticed the tone immediately. Grace forced a smile. We only had coffee. Jacob walked into the room. Who is he? Grace answered quietly. Daniel. Jacob looked at him. Does he know you work 2 jobs? Grace became still. Daniel looked confused. What does he mean? Nobody answered. Helen quickly changed the subject. Grace, did you finish the laundry? She looked down. I was going to do it tonight. You were going to? Helen sighed. You know everything that needs to be done. Grace nodded. Yes, Mom. Daniel stood silently. He looked around the house. He noticed something. Pictures covered the walls. Emily's graduation pictures, Jacob's sports pictures, family vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings. But there was almost nothing of Grace. Almost as if she had always been standing outside the family looking in. Later, Grace prepared dinner while everyone else sat around the table. Daniel watched quietly. Do you need help? She smiled. No, I'm okay. Helen answered before Grace could. She's always been good at taking care of things. The words sounded like a compliment. But Daniel heard something different. Grace wasn't being appreciated. She was being expected. Dinner was served. Emily looked at her plate. Why didn't you make my favorite? I'm sorry, I didn't know you wanted it. You should know. Grace lowered her eyes. I'll remember next time. Jacob laughed. You always say that. Daniel looked uncomfortable. He placed his fork down. Grace, she looked at him. You don't have to apologize for everything. The table became silent. Helen looked at him. This is how our family works. Daniel nodded politely. I understand. But his eyes showed that he didn't. After dinner, Grace walked Daniel outside. I'm sorry. He looked at her. For what? Tonight. You don't have to apologize. She smiled sadly. I guess it's a habit. He studied her face. Grace. What? Are you happy here? She froze. The question touched a place she had hidden for years. She looked back at the house, at the people inside. Then she whispered, They are my family. Daniel nodded. I know. But that wasn't my question. A tear formed in her eyes. I don't know. The honesty surprised even her. Daniel softened his voice. You deserve to know what it feels like to be loved without having to earn it. She looked at him. I don't know if that exists. He smiled gently. It does. How do you know? Because God loves us that way. She looked down, trying not to cry. Daniel continued. Grace, never let the way people treat you convince you that you have no value. Your worth was decided before anyone ever met you. The tears finally fell, but this time, they were not tears of loneliness. They were tears of being understood. As Daniel drove away, he looked into the rearview mirror at the Carter house. For the first time, he understood. Grace was not just a kind woman. She was a woman who had survived years of being unseen and somehow still chose love. He whispered, Lord, please help me protect her heart. The truck disappeared down the road. Grace stood at the window watching. For a moment, she placed her hand over her heart and quietly smiled. Grace sat across from him during her break. The lights above them were softer now. Daniel noticed she looked tired. Long day? She nodded. Always. Do you ever rest? She smiled. Sometimes. When? She thought about it. Sunday mornings, he laughed. Because of church? Because I feel like I can breathe there. He became quiet, then asked, Can I ask you something? Yes. Why don't you talk about your family? The smile slowly faded. She looked down. I do. You talk about what you do for them, but not how you feel. Silence filled the table. She looked at the coffee in her hands. For a long time, she said nothing. Then quietly, I don't want to make them sound bad. Daniel listened. I don't want people to hate them. Why? Because they're still my family. She took a breath. When I was younger, I thought if I worked harder, if I helped more, if I became the perfect daughter, maybe they would finally look at me the way they looked at Emily and Jacob. Daniel's expression softened. Grace. She shook her head. It's okay. I'm used to it. No. His voice was gentle but serious. You shouldn't have to become used to being hurt. She looked away. A tear slipped down her cheek. I remember when I was little. I made a picture for my parents. What was in it? All of us. A family holding hands. She smiled sadly. I wrote underneath it, the best family in the world. What happened? I gave it to them. They thanked me. But later, I found it in the trash. Daniel looked down, his heart broke. She quickly wiped her tears. I'm sorry. For what? For crying. You don't have to apologize for having feelings. She looked at him. Nobody had ever said that to her. Daniel reached across the table. He did not grab her hand. He simply placed his hand near hers, giving her the choice. After a moment, she placed her hand over his. I don't want to become bitter. You won't. How do you know? Because after everything, you still pray for them. She looked surprised. How did you know? Because someone who has hate in their heart doesn't speak about forgiveness the way you do. She smiled softly. I don't always feel forgiving. That's normal. Forgiveness isn't pretending something didn't hurt. It's choosing not to let the hurt control who you become. She looked at him. Where did you learn that? He smiled. My grandmother. What did she teach you? That a wounded heart can either build walls or build bridges. Grace looked toward the window. The streetlights reflected in the glass. For the first time, she wondered if God had brought Daniel into her life for a reason. That Saturday morning, the park was quiet. Children played nearby, families walked along the trails. Grace and Daniel sat beneath a large tree. A gentle breeze moved through the leaves. Daniel held 2 cups of coffee, one with sugar, one without. She smiled. You remembered. I pay attention. She looked at him. That's rare. What? Someone noticing small things. He became serious. Grace, I want you to know something. She waited. I don't see you the way your family sees you. Her eyes became emotional. I don't know how they see me. I do. You are someone who sacrifices without being asked. Someone who gives even when you have little. Someone who forgives even when you have every reason not to. She looked away. You make me sound better than I am. No. I think you don't see yourself clearly. They sat quietly. Then Daniel reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small wooden cross he had carved himself. He handed it to her. I made this. She held it carefully. It's beautiful. I wanted you to have it. Why? Because whenever you forget who you are, remember this. The cross is proof that you were loved before you ever had to prove yourself. Tears filled her eyes. Daniel, I'm not promising you that life will always be easy. I'm not promising I can fix every hurt. But I promise, you will never have to carry everything alone. She looked at him. You don't even know what the future holds. He smiled. Neither of us do. But God does. That evening, Grace sat beside her window. The small wooden cross rested on her nightstand. She opened her Bible. Her eyes landed on a verse. We love because He first loved us. 1 John 4:19. She whispered, Lord, thank you. Not because everything is fixed, but because you reminded me that I am seen. Meanwhile, Daniel worked late into the night. He looked at a drawing on his desk, a plan for a future home. At the top he wrote, a place where everyone feels loved. He smiled. Then he bowed his head. God, guide me. If Grace is part of your plan for my life, help me love her the way you love her. 2 people, 2 prayers, 2 hearts learning that God can bring beauty from broken places. But neither of them knew that Grace's greatest pain, the truth about where she came from, was still waiting to be revealed. The morning sun slowly rose over the quiet river. The water moved gently beneath the wooden bridge. Grace and Daniel walked along the path carrying cups of coffee. For months, their friendship had grown, not quickly, not through empty promises, but through conversations, through prayers, through learning each other's hearts. Daniel stopped near the bridge. Grace looked at him. Something wrong? He smiled. No, I'm just thinking. About what? He looked out over the water. About how much life can change. She smiled softly. Sometimes change scares me. Why? She looked down. Because every time something good happened, I was afraid it wouldn't last. Daniel became quiet. He understood. After years of disappointment, hope itself could feel dangerous. He turned toward her. Grace, can I tell you something? Of course. I used to think building something meant creating something people could see. A business. A house. A name. But I learned something. What? The most important things we build are the things people feel. She listened. Trust. Peace. Love. Home. A small smile appeared on her face. Home. He nodded. Yes. Not just a place. A feeling. They continued walking. Daniel stopped near a small wooden bench. I have something to show you. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket. Grace looked curious. What is it? He opened it. It was a drawing. A beautiful house. Large windows. A garden. A small porch. She looked at him. You designed this? He nodded. I've been saving money for years. I want to start my own construction company. Her eyes brightened. Daniel, this is amazing. He smiled. But there's something missing. What? He looked at her. Someone to share it with. She became quiet. Daniel gently continued. I don't want a marriage where two people just live in the same house. I want a home. Where people feel safe. Where children know they are loved. Where forgiveness is normal. Grace felt tears forming, because that was the dream she had carried since childhood. Not money, not fame, not success. Just love, she whispered. I've always wanted that. I know. She looked surprised. How? Because you told me. When? The first day we had coffee. You said you wanted a home filled with love, she smiled. You remembered. I remember everything about you. That evening the house was unusually quiet. Grace stood in the kitchen preparing dinner. Helen sat at the table. Richard read the newspaper. Emily was on her phone. Jacob watched television. Grace took a deep breath. Tonight was different. She wasn't asking permission. She was sharing her life. Everyone. They looked up. She wiped her hands on a towel. I want to tell you something. Helen sighed. What happened? Grace smiled. Nothing bad. Daniel asked me to marry him. Silence. The room became completely still. Emily looked up. The guy from church? Grace nodded. Yes. Jacob laughed softly. Really? You? Grace looked at him. What do you mean? He shrugged. I just didn't think. Never mind. Richard folded the newspaper. Does he have a stable job? Grace nodded. Yes. He owns his own construction business now. Helen looked surprised. Already? He worked hard for it. Richard looked thoughtful. Can he provide for you? Grace smiled gently. I don't need someone to provide everything for me. I need someone who will walk beside me. Emily crossed her arms. Does he know what our family is like? The room became quiet. Grace looked at her. What do you mean? Emily looked away. Nothing. Grace understood. She knew what Emily meant. Does he know your pain? Does he know what happened here? Later that night, Grace sat on her bed. The wooden cross Daniel made rested beside her Bible. She opened her journal. She wrote, Lord, I never thought someone would see me. Not what I do, not what I give. Me. Thank you for sending someone who reminds me of your love. The next morning, Grace and Daniel stood beneath the old oak tree, the same tree where she had cried years before. Father Michael smiled as he approached. I knew this day would come. Grace laughed. You did? He nodded. When you were little, you always prayed for a family that would love you. She smiled sadly. I still do. He looked at Daniel. Take care of her heart. Daniel nodded. I will. Not because she is perfect. Because she is precious. Daniel smiled. I know. Father Michael looked at Grace. Are you ready? She looked toward the church, then toward Daniel, then toward the sky. I think I am. The church bells ring, the same bells that rang when Grace was found as a baby. But this time, she was not alone. She was not abandoned. She was surrounded by people who chose her. And she was walking toward a future she never thought she would have. Morning. The sky was clear. The morning sun poured through the trees surrounding the small country church. White flowers decorated the entrance. Guests arrived with smiles and warm greetings. The church looked almost exactly the same as it did years ago, the same place where Grace had been found as a baby, the same place where she had cried alone. But today, she walked toward it surrounded by love. Into Theus church. Bridal room. Grace stood in front of a mirror. Her wedding dress was simple but beautiful. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from emotion. Father Michael stood behind her. "You look beautiful." She smiled. "Thank you." He noticed her expression. "What are you thinking about?" She looked at herself in the mirror. "I was thinking about the little girl I used to be. The girl who wondered if she mattered." Father Michael smiled gently. "What would you tell her now?" Grace took a deep breath. She whispered, "I would tell her, you are loved." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I wish she knew that sooner." Father Michael smiled. "Maybe she did." She looked at him. "How?" "Because God knew." A knock came at the door. Her friend Lily entered. "Are you ready?" Grace laughed softly. "I think so." Lily smiled. "You know, I remember when you first told me about Daniel. You were afraid." "I was." "What changed?" Grace looked toward the window. "God showed me that not everyone who enters your life comes to hurt you." It was her wedding day. The church was filled. Grace slowly walked down the aisle. Everyone stood. Daniel waited at the front. When he saw her, his eyes filled with tears, not because she looked beautiful, although she did, but because he knew her story. He knew the little girl who felt forgotten. He knew the woman who still chose kindness. And now, she was walking toward a new beginning. She reached him. He smiled. "You're beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." The pastor smiled. "We are gathered here today to celebrate a covenant between two people and before God." The ceremony continued. Then came the vows. Daniel took her hands. "Grace, when I first met you, I thought I was meeting someone kind, but I learned something. You are not just kind. You are strong. You have walked through storms, and somehow you still carry sunshine." She smiled through tears. "I promise to stand beside you. Not only when life is easy, but when it is difficult. I promise to listen. I promise to pray with you. I promise to remind you every day that you are loved." Grace looked at him. Then she spoke. "Daniel, I spent many years believing I had to earn love. I thought if I worked harder, if I gave more, maybe one day someone would choose me." She paused. "But you showed me something. You showed me that real love doesn't ask what someone can give. It asks how someone can give, can serve. I promise to love you, to respect you, to build a home with you, and to keep God at the center of our lives." The pastor smiled. "By the authority given to me, and before God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." The church filled with applause. Grace and Daniel smiled at each other. They kissed. 2 years later, Grace and Daniel opened a company together. Daniel studied building plans. Grace organized paperwork. Their company was small, but growing. A sign outside read, "Brooks and Carter Homes." Their employees respected them because they treated everyone like family. A young worker dropped a tool. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks," Daniel smiled. "It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes," Grace added. "We learn from them." The worker smiled. Nobody at their company was afraid to fail. A family stood outside their new house. The mother cried, "We never thought we could afford a place like this." Grace handed her the keys. Everyone deserves a place where they feel safe. The woman hugged her. Thank you. Grace smiled. Thank God. Years passed. The company expanded. They built neighborhoods. They helped families. They became successful, but they never forgot where they started. One evening, Richard sat quietly watching the news. A report showed local business owners Daniel and Grace Brooks awarded for community service. Helen watched beside him. The room was silent. Emily looked at the television. That's Grace. Nobody answered. Jacob lowered his eyes. She really did it. Richard sighed. She always had something special. Helen looked away. A painful realization came over her. They had spent years living with Grace, but never truly knowing her. The reporter on television said, Grace Brooks credits her faith for her success. She says forgiveness and love are more powerful than resentment. Helen's eyes filled with tears. She whispered. She never spoke badly about us. Richard looked down. No. Even after everything. She protected us. The room became quiet. For the first time, they began to understand the gift they had taken for granted. Meanwhile, Grace and Daniel sat outside on their porch. The stars filled the sky. Daniel held her hand. Are you happy? She smiled. Yes. More than I ever imagined. He looked at her. Do you ever think about the past? She was quiet. Sometimes. Does it still hurt? She looked toward the stars. Sometimes. But God healed a lot. Daniel squeezed her hand. You know, I think the little girl who prayed for love would be proud of you. Grace smiled. I think she would. A beautiful home. A loving marriage. A successful life. Everything Grace once prayed for, but somewhere in the distance, a forgotten truth from her beginning was preparing to return. A truth that would test her heart and reveal the true meaning of grace. Brooks and Carter Homes, Executive Office. It was morning. The sun poured through the large windows of the office. The walls displayed pictures of homes they had built. Families smiling in front of their new houses, children holding keys to their first bedrooms, employees celebrating company milestones. Grace stood near the window, looking over the city. She smiled. A woman who once walked everywhere because she had no money, now stood in a place she helped build. Daniel entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, one with a little sugar. He handed it to her. She smiled. You still remember. I told you. I pay attention. She laughed. You really do. They sat together. For a moment life felt peaceful, then the office phone rang. Grace answered. Brooks and Carter Homes, this is Grace speaking. A quiet voice responded. Grace? She paused. Yes, this is Sister Maria. Grace stood immediately. Sister Maria? The elderly nun who had cared for her after she was found at the church. The woman who had known her since she was a baby. It's been many years. Grace smiled. It has. How are you? There was a silence that felt heavy. I'm well. But I need to speak with you. Grace's smile faded slightly. Is something wrong? I don't know how to say this. But there is something you need to know about your past. Daniel noticed the change in her expression. Who is it? She covered the phone. It's Sister Maria. He immediately understood. The woman who knew where Grace came from. 1 hour later, Sister Maria sat across from Grace and Daniel. She was older now. Her hair was silver. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened an old folder. I have carried this for many years. Grace looked at the folder. What is it? Your records. Grace became still. My records? Sister Maria nodded. Your birth records. The room became silent. Daniel gently reached for Grace's hand. She looked confused. Why are you showing me these now? The elderly woman took a deep breath. Because you deserve to know the truth. Later that evening, rain tapped softly against the windows. Grace sat on the couch holding the old folder. She had not opened it yet. Daniel sat beside her. You don't have to do this tonight. She looked at him. I've spent my whole life wondering why I felt different. If there is an answer, I need to know. She slowly opened the folder. Inside were old papers, a hospital record, a birth certificate, an adoption document. Her hands began shaking. Daniel moved closer. She read the words silently, then whispered, "No." A tear fell. What? She looked at him. The Carters. They're not my biological parents. The words filled the room. Daniel held her hand. She continued reading. I was adopted. She stared at the papers. All this time, I thought something was wrong with me, but I was just different. A flashback began. 30 years earlier. A young Helen held baby Grace. A young Richard smiled. Father Michael spoke. Love her as your own. We will. The memory faded. Grace closed her eyes. She remembered every birthday, every moment she felt unwanted, every time she wondered why her siblings mattered more. A painful realization came. They knew. Daniel looked at her. Who? My parents. They knew I was adopted. Her voice broke. They knew. And they still treated me like I wasn't really theirs. Daniel reached for her. She leaned into him. For several minutes, she cried. Not with anger, with grief. She was grieving the childhood she never had, the love she always hoped for, the acceptance she waited for. The next morning, Grace visited Sister Maria. Garden. They sat beneath the old oak tree, the same place where Grace had prayed as a child. Why didn't anyone tell me? Sister Maria looked down. I don't know. I believe Helen and Richard loved you. But when Emily and Jacob were born, something changed. Grace looked away. I spent years trying to earn love from people who already decided I wasn't enough. Sister Maria touched her hand. Child, your value was never determined by their actions. It was determined by God. Grace looked toward the church. Grace sat alone beside the window. Daniel entered quietly. Are you okay? She looked at him. I don't know. He sat beside her. What are you feeling? She thought for a long time. Hurt, angry, sad. Then she whispered, but I don't want hate. Daniel looked at her. Why? Because hate would mean they changed who I am. She wiped a tear. They hurt me, but I don't want their hurt to become my heart. She opened her Bible. Her eyes landed on a verse. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. Ephesians 4:32. She read it quietly. Daniel listened. She closed the Bible. I don't know if I can forget. You don't have to pretend. But I want to forgive. Not because they deserve it, but because God forgave me. The next morning, Grace went to their house. The old house looked the same, but Grace was different. She stood at the door. Helen opened it. Her face changed immediately. Grace? Can I come in? Helen stepped aside. Of course. Richard entered the room. He looked nervous. What is this about? Grace held the folder. I know. Silence. Helen's face turned pale. You know? Grace nodded. I know I'm adopted. No one spoke. Finally, Richard sat down. We were going to tell you. When? He had no answer. Helen began crying. We were afraid. Afraid of what? That you would think we didn't love you. Grace looked at her. But you made me feel that way. The words were gentle, but painful. Helen lowered her head. I know. Grace took a deep breath. I came here because I don't want anger between us. I don't want revenge. I don't want to hurt you back. Richard looked at her. After everything, how can you say that? She answered softly. Because Jesus didn't wait until I was perfect to love me. He loved me first. She looked at all three of them. I forgive you. Everyone began crying. But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It means I give the pain to God, and I choose love instead. The little girl who once stood outside the family was now the one offering healing. The child who was not chosen by blood was choosing them through grace. The room was quiet, the same room where Grace had once sat as a child, waiting for someone to notice her. The same walls that had witnessed years of silence, but today, something was different. Grace sat across from Helen, Richard, Emily, and Jacob. No anger. No shouting. Only honesty. Helen held a cup of coffee in both hands. Her eyes were red from crying. I don't know where to begin. Grace looked at her. Begin with the truth. Helen took a deep breath. The truth is, I failed you. The words were difficult, but they were real. I told myself that because I adopted you, I had to work harder to love you. But when Emily was born, I allowed my heart to change. She wiped away tears. I started seeing you as someone who was different. Not as my daughter. Grace looked down. The confession hurt, but she listened. Richard lowered his head. I was wrong too. Grace looked at him. He continued. I saw how much you helped this family. I saw how responsible you were. And instead of protecting you, I took advantage of your kindness. His voice broke. You were a child. You should have been playing. You should have been laughing. Instead, you were carrying responsibilities that belonged to us. Emily began crying. I remember when I was younger, I used to think you were just supposed to do things for me. She looked at Grace. I never stopped to think about how you felt. I'm sorry. Jacob swallowed hard. I was cruel. I made jokes about you. I acted like you weren't my sister. He wiped his eyes. But you were the one who helped me when I needed someone. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Grace looked at him. Forgiveness isn't about what someone deserves. It's about what God teaches us to give. The room became silent. Helen reached for Grace's hand. I know saying sorry doesn't fix years of pain. Grace nodded. No. It doesn't. Helen looked down. But I want you to know, I don't want forgiveness because I feel guilty. I want to become someone different. Grace studied her face. For the first time, she saw regret. Not excuses. Not explanations. A desire to change. Grace gently squeezed her hand. Then start there. Start with change. Not for me, but because God is calling you to become better. Helen nodded through tears. I want that. Weeks later. The changes did not happen overnight. There were no magical fixes. Healing took time. One morning, Grace entered the kitchen. Helen was already there. For years, Grace had prepared every meal, but today, Helen was cooking breakfast. Grace smiled. What are you doing? Helen laughed. Learning. Learning what? How to take care of the daughter who spent years taking care of me. Grace became quiet, then smiled. Thank you. They went to the community center that afternoon. Emily volunteered with children. She helped young girls who struggled with confidence. A little girl asked, "Why do you help people?" Emily smiled. "Because someone once showed me what kindness looks like." Jacob worked alongside Daniel. They built homes for families in need. Daniel handed him a tool. "You know, your sister would be proud." Jacob smiled sadly. "I hope so." Next day is Sunday. On that morning, the Carter family sat together, not because they wanted to appear better, not because they wanted people to forgive them, but because they truly wanted God. The pastor spoke. Real transformation is not changing your image, it is allowing God to change your heart. Helen listened carefully. Tears filled her eyes. After the service, Helen approached Grace. "I understand something now." Grace looked at her. "What?" "I thought being a mother meant providing food, clothes, and a home. But I learned, a child needs to know they are chosen." Grace smiled gently. "Yes." Helen hugged her. This time, Grace didn't feel like she was pretending. The house was peaceful. Grace sat beside her bed. The Bible rested open. Daniel entered quietly. "You okay?" She smiled. "Yes." He sat beside her. "I was thinking." "About what?" "My whole life. I wanted answers. Why did they treat me that way? Why did I feel unwanted?" Daniel listened. "And now?" She looked toward the window. "Now I realize. Some answers don't heal you. God does." She opened her Bible. Her eyes fell on the words, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Romans 12:21. She smiled. "That verse followed me my whole life." Daniel nodded. "And now you understand it?" She looked at him. "I think so. I thought forgiveness meant saying what happened didn't matter, but it doesn't. It means what happened doesn't control my future." Daniel held her hand. "I'm proud of you," she smiled. "I didn't do this alone." "No. You walked with God." Later that night, in Carter House bedroom, Helen and Richard sat together. A family photo was on the table. Not an old photo. A new one. Grace standing beside them. Everyone smiling. Richard looked at it. "Do you think she knows how much we love her now?" Helen smiled sadly. "I hope so. Then we spend the rest of our lives showing her." Grace knelt beside her bed. She prayed. "Lord, thank you. Not because my past changed, but because you changed my heart. Please help my family continue to grow. Help them know your love, not because they are afraid, not because they feel guilty, but because they truly know you. Amen." That afternoon, the sunlight filled the room. Grace sat on the couch with Daniel. On the coffee table was the old folder Sister Maria had given her. For weeks, Grace had carried it with her, not because she was afraid, but because she was trying to understand. Daniel noticed her looking at the papers. "You've been quiet today." She smiled softly. "I'm thinking about your birth parents." She nodded. "Yes." A long silence followed. "I spent my whole life wondering why I was different. Now I know I was." Daniel reached for her hand. "But different doesn't mean less." She smiled. "I know." A knock came at the door. Grace looked surprised. "I wasn't expecting anyone." She opened the door. Standing there was Sister Maria. Beside her was an older woman. Her hands trembled. Her eyes filled with tears. Grace looked confused. Sister Maria? The elderly woman took a deep breath. Grace, this is someone you need to meet. The older woman looked at her. Her lips trembled. My name is Clara. Grace stared. I knew your mother. The room became silent. Moments later, Grace, Daniel, Sister Maria, and Clara sat together. Grace struggled to speak. You knew my mother? Clara nodded. Yes. She was my closest friend. Grace looked down. Where is she? Clara's eyes filled with sadness. She passed away many years ago. Grace closed her eyes. A quiet sadness came over her. Even though she never knew her, she felt the loss. Clara opened a small wooden box. I kept this for you. She placed it on the table. Grace slowly opened it. Inside was a small baby blanket and a letter. Her hands shook. She wrote this before she gave you to the church. Grace looked at Sister Maria. She left me? Sister Maria gently answered. She did. But not because she didn't love you. Grace looked confused. Then why? Clara spoke softly. Your mother was very young. She had no money, no family support. She was afraid she couldn't give you the life you deserved. Grace held the blanket. She chose adoption. Clara nodded. She prayed over you every night. She wanted you to have a home, a family. She wanted you to be loved. Grace opened the letter. Her mother's handwriting was shaky. She read aloud. My precious daughter Grace. If you ever read this, I want you to know something. I did not leave you because I didn't love you. I left you because I loved you more than myself. I prayed that God would place you with people who would see your worth. I prayed you would grow up knowing you are a gift. Always remember, you were never unwanted. You were always loved. Grace covered her mouth. Tears flowed freely. For years, she believed her beginning was a rejection. Now she understood. It was a sacrifice. Daniel held her close. Clara cried too. I am sorry you spent so many years feeling unwanted. Grace shook her head. No. I don't want to live in sadness. She looked at the letter. My mother loved me. She just loved me enough to let me go. Sunset. The sky was painted with orange and gold. Grace walked through the church garden, the place where her story began. Daniel walked beside her. How do you feel? She looked toward the old church doors, peaceful. After everything? She smiled. Yes. I spent years searching for where I belonged. And now? She looked at him. I know. Where? She touched her heart. With God. They sat beneath the old oak tree. Grace held her mother's letter. I used to think my story began with being abandoned. Daniel listened. But it didn't. It began with love. She looked toward the church. My mother loved me. Father Michael loved me. God loved me. And even the people who hurt me, God is teaching them how to love. Later that evening, K. Carter House. Dinner table. The entire family sat together. For the first time, Grace was not serving. She was sitting. Helen noticed. Grace? Yes? Let me get that. She reached for Grace's plate. Grace smiled. Thank you. A simple moment, but a powerful one. Richard looked around the table. I never thought we would be here. Grace smiled. Neither did I. Helen reached across. I know we can't change the past. No. But we can honor the future. Grace nodded. That's all God asks. After dinner, the family stood outside. Emily looked at Grace. I used to think being a family meant sharing the same name. Grace smiled. And now? Emily looked at everyone. I think it means choosing love. Grace, a woman who had once felt like she didn't belong, now stood surrounded by people whose hearts had changed. Not because they were forced, not because they felt guilty, but because God had transformed them. That night, Grace prayed, Lord, thank you for every chapter. The painful ones, the joyful ones, the ones I understood, and the ones I didn't. Thank you for showing me that my worth was never decided by people. It was decided by you. Amen. The church, the homes, the family, the life Grace built. A story that began with a question, why wasn't I chosen? Ended with an answer. You were chosen all along. Years had passed. The city had changed. The Brooks and Carter Homes Company had grown beyond anything Grace and Daniel imagined. But success was no longer measured by money. It was measured by lives changed. A large building stood at the center of town. Above the entrance were the words, The Grace House Foundation. A place for children without homes. A place for young people who felt forgotten. A place where every child heard the words Grace once needed to hear. You are loved. Inside the building, children laughed. Teachers helped with homework. Counselors listened. Grace walked through the halls greeting everyone by name. Good morning, Mrs. Grace. A little boy ran toward her. She smiled. Good morning, Noah. Did you finish your reading? He looked down. Almost. She laughed. Almost counts as progress. Daniel entered carrying boxes. Grace smiled. You know you don't have to do everything yourself. He smiled. I learned from someone. Who? You. She laughed. I don't think that's true. It is. You taught me that love is something you do. A young girl sat alone near the window. Her name was Anna. Grace noticed her. She walked over. Can I sit with you? The girl shrugged. Okay. Grace sat beside her. What are you drawing? The girl covered the paper. Nothing. Grace smiled. I used to do that. Do what? Hide things I thought weren't good enough. The girl looked at her. You? Grace nodded. Me. The girl looked surprised. But you're famous. Grace laughed. I wasn't always. What were you before? Grace looked around the room. Someone who needed someone to tell her she mattered. The girl's eyes filled with tears. Did someone tell you? Grace smiled. Yes. God did. That afternoon. The Carter family sat together. They were older now. Life had changed them. Not just their circumstances, their hearts. Helen looked through an old photo album. She stopped at a picture. A young Grace, standing slightly away from everyone. Helen touched the picture. I wish I could go back. Richard looked at her. Why? Because she was right there. What do you mean? I spent years looking at her. But I never truly saw her. Emily entered carrying flowers. I brought these for Grace. Helen smiled. You still do that every week? Emily nodded. Yes. Why? Because she spent years making everyone feel loved. Now it's our turn. Jacob sat down. I still think about how I treated her. Richard sighed. Me too. Jacob looked at him. But she never used our mistakes against us. Helen smiled sadly. That was Grace set. The church bells rang. The same bells that announced the beginning of Grace's story. Grace and Daniel walked slowly through the garden. They were older now. Their hair carried years of memories. Their hands carried years of work. But their love was stronger than ever. They stopped beneath the old oak tree. Grace looked at the church. I never imagined my life would become this. Daniel smiled. Neither did I. She laughed softly. I used to pray for someone to love me. And God gave you more than that. She looked at him. What did he give me? A chance to love others. They sat beneath the tree. Grace opened her Bible. She read, "We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him." Romans 8:28. She smiled. I understand now. Daniel looked at her. What? My story wasn't about being abandoned. It was about being found. A group of children from the foundation walked toward them. Anna ran ahead. Mrs. Grace, she smiled. Yes? Can you tell us the story again? Grace laughed. Which story? The one about how you became happy. She looked at the children, then at Daniel, then toward the church. She smiled. Okay. But remember something. What? The most important part of my story is not that I was hurt. It's that I was healed. The children sat around her. Grace began telling them, not about wealth, not about success, but about faith, about forgiveness, about love. Every child deserves to know they are chosen. The stars shine above the town. Grace and Daniel stand outside the church. Grace looks toward the sky. Thank you, Lord. Daniel takes her hand. For everything? She smiles. For everything. A life that began with uncertainty became a testimony of grace. A child who wondered if she belonged became a woman who gave others a place to belong. A heart that was wounded became a heart that healed others, because love was never only found in blood. Love was found in God.